In this screencast, we are going to be going over Chapter 6, Section 1, Combining Supply and Demand. At the end of this section, students will be able to 1. Explain how supply and demand create balance in the marketplace. 2. Compare a market in equilibrium with a market in disequilibrium. And 3. Analyze the effects of price ceilings and price floors. Balancing the market. The point at which quantity demanded and quantity supplied come together is known as equilibrium. Let's take a look at a graph and supply and demand schedule to see if we can identify visually where the equilibrium point is. This specific example is going to be going over pizza slices at 50 cents per slice. Our supply is 100 pieces of pizza being supplied at 50 cents a slice. Our demand is 300 pieces of pizza at 50 cents. That creates a shortage of 200 slices of pizza. There's going to be 200 slices of pizza demanded that suppliers are not willing to produce at 50 cents. As the price increases, more suppliers are willing to supply, but less consumers are demanding because prices went up. You have to remember the law of supply states that as prices go up, suppliers will produce more. But the law of demand states as prices go up, consumers are going to demand less. At $1.50 a slice, we reach our equilibrium. This means that at $1.50 per slice, our suppliers are willing to produce 200, our consumers are going to demand 200, so there will be no more shortage due to an excess of demand. Again, this is a perfect equilibrium point because suppliers will produce enough to keep consumers supplied, and consumers will demand enough so that suppliers do not waste resources by making too little or making too much. But as we keep increasing prices, we move away from equilibrium because we start to create a surplus. A surplus is all the space between each point as price goes up. At $2 per slice, we create a surplus of about 100 pieces of pizza. $2.50, that goes up to about 200 pieces of pizza. And at $3 a slice, that goes up to about 300 slices of pizza. That surplus is bad for business because if you're a producer and you produce too much and there's that much of a surplus, that's pizza you're throwing away, or you're basically giving away to coworkers or to workers so that them and their families can eat it. Either way, it's money you lost because you produced too much and now you are wasting it. So this is that balance being created by consumers and producers doing a tug-of-war battle back and forth trying to find that happy medium. At this specific example, that happy medium, that equilibrium point is $1.50 a slice. Market disequilibrium. If the market price or the quantity supplied is anywhere but at that equilibrium price, that market is at a state of disequilibrium. This means that anytime there is a surplus or a shortage, that market is at disequilibrium. When you are at equilibrium, you are producing enough that consumers are buying it all, and prices are at a certain point where consumers are willing to buy all those goods at that price. So there will be no shortage and there will be no surplus. There are two causes for disequilibrium. The first is excess demand, which is what creates our shortage. This excess of demand occurs when quantity demanded is more than quantity supplied. If there's a lot of people demanding a good, but supply is not there by producers, there's going to be empty shelves in those stores, or there's going to be empty refrigerators in those restaurants because there's not enough being supplied to meet the needs of all the people wanting them. 2 is excess of supply. This creates our surplus. This occurs when quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. So as prices go up, and the law of supply states that prices go up, supply goes up. If prices go up and producers produce more of their goods, but consumers aren't willing to pay for those goods at those prices, there's going to be a surplus. There's going to be a whole warehouse full of those goods and those services that are not being sold to consumers. In the food industry, surpluses are extremely bad because if you are making all those pizzas and all those other kinds of food goods, but consumers are not going in and buying them, that surplus is going to be wasted because that food is going to spoil. In other industries like technology, tablets, computers, TVs, if you produce too much of a good and you have a whole warehouse with all those TVs or all those tablets or those computers in those warehouses, if new technology comes about like it always does, there's a chance you might not be able to sell what's in those warehouses because new technology might supersede whatever it is you produced. Surpluses as a producer are not good things. Interactions between buyers and sellers will always push the market towards equilibrium. This is that tug-of-war battle I always talk about, where producers and consumers are always battling, trying to find a happy medium. That will always occur in the market. The market will always try to balance itself and reach that point of equilibrium. On your worksheets given out in class, I want you to take the data on this supply and demand schedule and this supply and demand schedule and plot the data to create your supply and demand curves. In addition, I also want you to identify the equilibrium by creating a nice bold, dark bubble where you can identify that equilibrium point where the supply and demand curves meet. Do that and bring it to class, and we will discuss it and go over it in class. Okay. Let's talk about government intervention. This is always a hot topic that I personally want to spend a lot of time on because this is something that brings a lot of this material into real world scenarios. In some cases, the government steps in to control prices. These interventions appear as price ceilings and price floors. The price ceiling that we're going to talk about is going to be rent control. That is a very, very popular and controversial topic. The price floor we're going to discuss is going to be minimum wage. Again, another controversial and hot topic, especially in today's times. Price ceiling. The price ceiling is the maximum legal price consumers, producers are able to sell their good or their service for. Lots of times the result of a price ceiling is there is a shortage. A shortage is created. In our example that we're going to go over, we're going to talk about rent control. Rent control often happens in a lot of heavily populated cities like New York, San Francisco, and so on. A lot of these areas have very, very, very high price rental properties. The government often tries to step in to try to help people by saying they're going to create a price ceiling that states that there's going to be a maximum legal price that property owners are going to be able to charge for rent for their properties. In this example, you can see that our equilibrium price in this specific example is $900 a month rent. If the government steps in and says that they are going to implement a price ceiling of $600 for rent in this urban area, maybe New York, maybe San Francisco, what we see is that at $600 a month, there's only going to be 300 apartments supplied by landlords and property owners. There's going to be some people that aren't going to be able to or are going to want to rent their properties at the lower $600 a month price because maybe their properties are worth more than that. Maybe their mortgage that they have to pay a month is way more than that, and $600 a month isn't going to pay the bills for them. But at $600 a month, we have 500 people that are going to demand those apartments because the price is so low. So what happens? What's the result of this discrepancy? There is a market shortage. What is that shortage? 200 apartments. There's going to be 200 less apartments than there are people looking for those apartments. So some of those people that the government is trying to help that could afford that $600 a month rent aren't going to be able to get it because this specific ceiling created a shortage of 200 apartments. Some of those people are not going to be able to get apartments. It's important to note that this is important. It is important to note that this is why they call it a ceiling. A lot of people, when they see that line on the bottom part of the supply and demand curve, they don't understand why that's the ceiling and not the floor. This is the ceiling because prices want to go up to the equilibrium, but the price ceiling stops the price from going up. Again, price wants to go up to the equilibrium price. It wants to go up, but the ceiling stops it at a certain price. Lastly, price floor. This, on the other hand, is the lowest legal price. This will often create a surplus as a result of a price floor. In this example, we're going to talk about minimum wage. This is something extremely important, not only to us in California because of what's going on with our minimum wage increases, but also nationally because there's a lot of talk of increasing the national minimum wage. There's good arguments on both sides, but I want to show you an economic argument that often reflects a negative aspect of minimum wage increases. In this example, you could see that our equilibrium price is $9 an hour. If the government steps in and says that our price floor is going to be $12 an hour, what's that going to do? That is going to create a situation at $12 an hour that the demand to hire workers by businesses, they're going to demand it. That's why they're on the demand side, because they demand workers in order to help them with their businesses. They're only going to want to hire 300 people because they have to pay them the $12 an hour. But at $12 an hour, there's going to be 500 people wanting to supply their labor because the pay is higher. The workers on this side are going to be on the supply side because they have the labor to supply to the firms, to the businesses. The result is there's going to be 200 more workers looking for employment when there's not those positions available. That is going to create a surplus. There's going to be a lot of workers looking for work that are not going to be able to find work because there are 200 fewer employers willing to hire. It's important to note that this is why they call it a price floor. Price wants to go down to the equilibrium, but the price floor stops it from going down. That is why they call it a price floor and not a price ceiling. Thank you, and I hope this was helpful.